Hello and welcome everyone to the roadmap for the development of downstream natural gas markets. My name is Commissioner Diane Berman. I'm a commissioner with the New York PSC, and I'm also chair of the Gas Committee. NARUC international programs seek to empower the global community to drive meaningful change in the energy sector. Collaboration is key. NARUC, regulators, and regulatory staff work in partnership with the United States federal and state regulators and international officials to positively work on educational exchanges. The desire is to make a lasting positive impact in helping focus on continuously improving the quality, effect, and effectiveness of regulations internationally through dialogue and collaboration. Trainings, peer reviews, dialogue facilitation, and creation of foundational principle documents are a broad suite of tools employed in this endeavor. The webinar today on the roadmap for the development of downstream natural gas markets is a part of the Asia Gas Partnership with generous support from the U.S. Agency of International Development Regional Development Mission in Asia. I want to now turn for some brief opening remarks from His Excellency, the U.S. Ambassador to the Kingdom of Thailand. Ambassador.
Good evening, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. My name is Michael George DeSambri, and I am proud to serve as the United States Ambassador to the Kingdom of Thailand. I am very pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, presenting the roadmap for the development of downstream natural gas markets. I would like to thank the organizer of today's event, which is part of our Asia Gas Partnership. And I would like to acknowledge the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, NARUC, for organizing this webinar and for their work facilitating the exchange of regulatory best practices among the United States, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Papua New Guinea. As United States Ambassador to Thailand and the first U.S. ambassador to come from the private sector, one of my top priorities is to strengthen the U.S.-Thai economic partnership, and the Asia Gas Partnership does just that, energizing the U.S.-Thai relationship and expanding our economic partnership. Here in Thailand, I emphasize at every meeting with the Royal Thai government that I want Thailand to view myself, the U.S. Embassy, and the entire U.S. government as a partner in the development of Thailand. Today's event is one of many such avenues that we are pursuing to assist the economic development of Thailand and to strengthen the U.S.-Thai economic partnership. Today, we will be focusing on the development of Thailand's downstream natural gas regulation in line with international best practices. The Asia Gas Partnership supports partner countries throughout the region by mobilizing private investment and modernizing energy sector technologies that expand domestic gas markets in Asia. These investments will support the region's future economic growth, self-reliance, and resilience for a sustainable energy future. The work of the partnership, and specifically the launch of this roadmap, will strengthen the engagement between U.S. and Thai energy regulators and lay the groundwork for increased bilateral trade in natural gas. Supporting regulators in a well-developed natural gas market promotes good governance, energy market liberalization, and transparency in the sector. The roadmap for the development of downstream natural gas markets is a step-by-step guide for energy regulators and an important tool to establish natural gas markets in the Asia-Pacific. In addition to the roadmap, the Asia Gas Partnership is pairing U.S. regulatory experts, including members of this panel, with Thailand's Office of the Energy Regulatory Commission to help with their strategy and implementation moving forward. We look forward to further exchanges through the Asia Gas Partnership and future opportunities to accelerate growth of the region's expansive energy markets. Thank you again for your participation in today's webinar. I look forward to collaborating with Thai companies to further strengthen the U.S.-Thai economic and commercial relationship.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for those thoughtful remarks. As I said, I am a commissioner of the New York State Public Service Commission, which regulates the state's electric, gas, steam, telecommunications, and water utilities, and also oversees the cable industry. In addition, I serve as the National Association of Regulatory Commissioners on the Board of Directors and as the Gas Committee Chair. I'm a member of NARUC's Committee on International Relations, Washington Action, Critical Infrastructure, and the Subcommittee on Supplier and Workforce Diversity and Pipeline Safety. I also chair the NARUC Department of Energy Natural Gas Partnership. Immediately prior to the commission, I was chief counsel to the New York State Senate Republicans. We live in exciting, changing, and challenging times in the energy industry, and it's crucial time for energy regulators to be involved with natural gas. In my various leadership roles with gas over the years, I have sought to foster awareness and understanding of the issues affecting the transportation, distribution, and sale of natural gas in a safe, efficient, reliable, economical, and environmentally responsible way. We must, as regulators, grapple with critical issues, including reliability, pipeline safety, energy efficiency, and the review of appropriate policies to enhance and modernize the natural gas utility infrastructure. We may seek to understand and foster new technologies such as renewable natural gas and other technologies related to decarbonization. We have to be able to examine technical aspects of electricity, look at natural gas interdependencies, the use of natural gas for electric generation, generators, transportation, liquefied natural gas, and so much more. My personal philosophy is one of collaboration and engaging with my peers, both in the United States and internationally. I am extremely mindful of the fact that in the US, a state utility regulator's mission is to serve the public interest by assuring the delivery of safe, reliable services at reasonable rates. In the midst of unprecedented challenges from COVID-19, a regulator's job is even more critically important to help in the continued delivery of these services while taking care of impacted consumers. The challenges facing all of us with COVID-19 have likely eclipsed anything we have seen before, both in size and scope. In the face of these enormous challenges and uncertainties, the energy world has had to step up and ensure that the power grid remains reliable and resilient. The heart of effective energy leadership in dealing with such a monumental crisis comes down to resiliency and ensuring we have the necessary infrastructure in place. So it's really important that we look internationally, specifically at energy infrastructure projects and what we need. It is clear that access to energy is essential to every aspect of sustaining and improving economic, environmental, and societal conditions. In fact, USAID work has shown that in many countries they work with, basic infrastructure is failing, insufficient, or non-existent. Inadequate access to infrastructure is a key barrier to economic growth. Asia has a demand for infrastructure investment, but we must be cognizant that in working together with Asia to meet that kind of demand will require all of us to tackle some serious challenges and unlock opportunities. Helping ensure the success of Asia's energy market growth, especially advanced energy technologies and liquefied natural gas, can help all of us thrive. Ensuring improved infrastructure forces stability, accelerates economic growth, and fuels economic recovery. Under the auspices of USAID's Regional Development Mission for Asia and in support of the Asia Edge Initiative, NARUC, along with others, are engaged in the Asia Gas Partnership Program to establish a public-private partnership involving government and industry representatives from the US and Indo-Pacific countries. The objective of the Asia Gas Partnership is to share best practices in the development of secure, reliable, and economic regulatory frameworks governing natural gas sector development while facilitating investment and regulatory advances in the energy industry, ultimately helping to stimulate gas demand growth by optimizing gas network infrastructure development and developing domestic gas markets in Asia. Today, we're going to learn about the roadmap for the development of downstream natural gas markets. This roadmap and corresponding tools and infographics will be shared as an informative step-by-step reference for energy regulators and energy sector decision makers in countries introducing LNG imports and subsequently overseeing domestic regulation of downstream natural gas markets. The roadmap outlines key fundamental concepts governing the structure of well-functioning, competitive downstream natural gas sectors as exhibited through best practices. We look to the lessons of the US to help us with that. This document gets under the hood and helps to identify recommended key regulatory steps, provisions, and considerations necessary to establish a diversified and competitive downstream gas sector in countries integrating imported LNG resources. Today, we're going to be turning first to the Honorable Ethan Kimbrell, Commissioner from the Illinois Commerce Commission. He serves as NARUC's Committee on Gas, Subcommittee on Pipeline Safety, where he is both the Vice Chair of both committees, and the Committee on International Relations. He serves on the Board of Directors for the Organization of PJM States, OPSI, and is a member of OPSI's Market Monitoring Advisory Committee, as well as the Independent State Agencies Committee. Additionally, Commissioner Kimbrell is a member of the NARUC DOE Natural Gas Partnership and is on the Board of Advisors for the Institute for Regulatory Policy Studies at Illinois State University. And he is a member of the NARUC NASIO, the National Association of State Energy Officials, Microgrid State Working Group. Ethan, I'd like to turn it over to you to give some brief overview of the roadmap key issues and some thoughtful considerations that we should be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. As Commissioner Berman stated, I'll give a brief overview of the roadmap. Our roadmap is organized according to the order in which regulatory and policy reforms required to formulate downstream natural gas sectors should be implemented. In the first section of the roadmap, we discussed the initial regulatory reforms and steps required to establish foundations of downstream natural gas markets and incentives for investment in downstream infrastructure. Topics covered here are the importance of regulatory certainty, having a clearly defined review or approval process for long-term network development plans, having an open and transparent process for granting a certificate of public convenience, as well as for an environmental assessment, having an effective assessment of the reasonableness of the long-term demand forecasts, having consistency in evaluating network upgrade projects for reliability, network expansion projects for economic growth, and interregional projects for common interests. Also covered in this section are the need for having standard filing requirements for all projects of similar type, having cost-benefit analysis and risk assessment of proposed projects, and having infrastructure replacement and upgrade plans. The sections that follow are divided into days, with day 0 representing the development of a wholesale market, day 1, increased development of the wholesale market, and day 2, developing a retail market. Day 0, our wholesale market review, discusses getting key regulatory and market provisions in place, such as cultivating and incentivizing reliable sources for natural gas imports if importing LNG, unbundling gas production from transmission, unbundling transmission from storage and distribution, ensuring non-discriminatory open access to transmission pipeline capacity and storage, and establishing natural gas quality standards. Day 1, our transmission pipeline capacity and contracts review discusses pipeline transmission capacity, contract options, and platforms required for trading transmission pipeline capacity. Day 2, our retail market review discusses the final stages of competitive downstream natural gas markets, including unbundling retail suppliers that purchase natural gas commodities from gas distribution utilities that own distribution infrastructure to customers, ensuring non-discriminatory open access to the locality's gas distribution pipelines through a regulated tariff, clearly defining the retail supplier certification process, establishing the ability for end users to select alternative retail gas suppliers as well as contract type, and establishing retail market monitoring and mitigation against anti-competitive and fraudulent marketing practices. Anticipated timeframes required to establish each stage of downstream natural gas market development are 2 to 3 years minimum for wholesale market steps within day zero, 1 to 2 years for the transmission pipeline capacity and contract steps within day one, and 1 to 2 years for the steps to establish retail market within day two. These days and the steps within them that you are encouraged to take are created to portray an advisable pathway towards competitive and efficient downstream natural gas markets. That said, a country may skip a step or two and move from the steps in day zero to day one or to day two, revisiting the missing steps at a later time to ensure further comprehensive progress. That's advisable though. That concludes my cursory review of the roadmap. Thank you, Commissioner Berman.
That's very, very. Next, we're going to move to the Honorable Jay Velasquez, Commissioner of Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission. Commissioner Velasquez currently serves as the chair of the Subcommittee on Pipeline Safety, co-vice chair of the Committee on Critical Infrastructure, and as a member of the Committee on Gas for the National Association of Regulatory Commissioners. He also serves as a member of the Gas Technology Institute Public Interest Advisory Committee and on the Washington Action Program, which monitors federal activities related to the Commission's work. He previously served as Senior Budget Assistant to the Governor in the Office of Financial Management, working in the General Government section, Transportation section, and as lead analyst on revenue issues. Before that, he worked for the Washington House of Representatives in a variety of roles, including Senior Fiscal Analyst, Assistant Director of Policy, and Policy Analyst on Transportation and Finance issues. He also worked for the Washington Department of Transportation. Commissioner Velasquez has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and a Master of Science in Finance from Seattle University. Commissioner, would you like to give your views as a Washington regulator on the roadmap and the next steps here?
Thank you, Commissioner Berman, and thank you, Commissioner Kimbrough, for that overview of the roadmap. From a state regulator's perspective, the roadmap is really a good tool to help build that sequential steps needed to establish good regulation and good transparency in the development and sustainment of a downstream natural gas market. From the Washington state regulator's perspective, in a lot of cases with the roadmap, it was a good reminder of a lot of the things that here in the United States we have for regulation, but we often need to remind ourselves what some of the purpose of that is. So when you look at each of the 3 days and the steps needed to establish that a good regime for a wholesale and retail natural gas market, I think some of the elements that are key, particularly from my standpoint as a state regulator, is establishing that transparent planning and infrastructure detail for both expansion of infrastructure as well as the maintenance and the replacement and upgrade of that infrastructure for safety purposes. And I think the key part there is establishing the mechanism to look at those plans on a long-term basis, as well as being able to approve them. And sometimes when you don't necessarily have a full integrated resource plan that looks at the different aspects of a natural gas market, like demand, supply, as well as infrastructure expansion and replacement, you don't necessarily have to have that, but the roadmap does give you a lot of those steps to help develop that kind of long-term integrated planning framework going forward in the future. I think the other aspect of the roadmap, and that's helpful here, is, as Commissioner Kimbrough mentioned, there's regulatory certainty, and that comes in a variety of forms, not only from the aspect of permit certainty for the infrastructure building itself, but there's also the certainty for cost recovery, as well as the incentives for keeping that infrastructure in place and going. In addition to, from a state regulator's perspective in Washington, we have not only the integrated resource plan process, which a gas company will then come forward with a 20-year plan of forecasted demand, supply, as well as infrastructure needed for the system. We then approve that. We also look at the ongoing maintenance and infrastructure replacement and upgrade through a separate plan that helps to ensure the safety and the reliability of the system. I think as natural gas markets are developing, and particularly when LNG is used as a resource, it can be good for both not only supply but also as a storage mechanism as well. Because the other piece that you have to look at is on the supply side for natural gas, you definitely need some certainty, not only from the pipeline capacity, but also the ability to store natural gas, as well as have the ability to prioritize the supply of natural gas in the event of any kind of supply constraints or other disruption. So thank you, Commissioner Berman. Those are just a few of my thoughts on the roadmap and how it applies from a regulatory standpoint.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. Next, we're going to hear from Mr. Andreas Thanos, Policy Specialist with the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities. Mr. Thanos has been with the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities for over 26 years, during which the state's natural gas market experienced tremendous transformation. He has experience in rate setting, infrastructure expansion, and licensing retail natural gas providers. Mr. Thanos is also the chair of the NARUC Staff Subcommittee on Gas, co-author of the NARUC LNG Primer, and has broad international experience, including multiple activities. He also is a member of the advisory board to the North American Energy Standards Board. Andreas is really our international gas guru. He's also right now in the process of working with several others to update the NARUC LNG Primer, and we're looking forward to seeing that. I'd like to turn to him and ask him, as our regulatory international gas guru, to get under the hood on key considerations in the roadmap and areas of focus. I will say we're going to also have Andreas as our prime person on this webinar, answering some of the more technical questions. But I wanted to let you know that we're going to have everyone sort of talk a little bit about the questions. Andreas?
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I will not speak about the big picture stuff, but let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was not born a U.S. citizen. I came into this country in my 20s, but I was born and raised in a country that only recently moved from a state-owned gas distribution system to a competitive market from Greece that was forced by the European Union to develop a competitive natural gas retail and wholesale market. So why am I saying that? I'm saying that because for many who are listening in or reading our reports, this may seem like a very complicated process, a process that will involve persuading politicians, governments, persuading the customers. It can be a complicated process, but it can also be simplified. I think that our role here is to help you simplify the process. Throughout its history, natural gas in the United States had successes and failures. We did learn from our failures, and we're enjoying our successes. So we, I speak without having discussed this with my colleagues here on this panel, we are here to help you benefit from our successes, benefit from what we know that has worked, and then you can adapt it to the reality of your particular political or socioeconomic situation. It is not a simple thing if you look at it without having gotten involved in it, to open up a market that, or to create a brand new market where natural gas does not exist. But it can be achieved very easily with the right technical expertise in engineering and the right technical expertise in economics. And for those who are afraid that they might lose their job in the government, do not fear, because a regulatory agency is always there. The economics of natural gas distribution and markets require that there is a regulator of some sort, because if it's a transmission pipeline or local distribution pipeline, it is a natural monopoly. And then such, it needs to be regulated so that it behaves as it would have in a fully competitive market. So it would behave just as the supermarket down the corner would behave, although, you know, in gas you do not have competition. With that, I will not continue more on my monologue, but we are here to help, and we are here to simplify things and make them easy for you. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Commissioner Berman and Commissioner Balazs and Kimbrough.
Thank you so much. So now let's turn to some of the technical questions that we received. For first, could you clarify whether open access to integral infrastructure should be mandated from the onset with the establishment of a downstream natural gas market, or introduced over time as the market evolves? Andreas?
Oh, Andreas, okay, yes.
Keep in mind while you're thinking that there's also introduction of an open access over time may have legal and financial implications, and looking at the contractual safeguards. Thank you, Andreas.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. The question, this question is tough to answer. The easy answer would be, oh, well, do it gradually. The problem with doing it gradually has the economic and political implications that you mentioned, because gradually, who owns the majority? Does the government own the majority? How easy would it be for the government to let go of those assets that it controls for many reasons, for whether it's employment, whether it's political influence, whether it's economic policy influence? My take on this is it would be best to open it up, open access from the get-go, so everybody who wants to participate can participate from the beginning, and there will not be questions in the future about whether there was any political or other favoritism that took place and created some sort of like a dominant oligopolist, if you will. So yes, open access both in the upstream and downstream natural gas market should, in my opinion, should be done as quickly as possible. It may not be achievable right away, because you may end up having only one or two entities with adequate capital to invest in this industry, depending on the local economy, and some nations do not want external influence in their national infrastructure. So with a proviso that it may need to be adjusted a little bit, I would say yes, open access right away would be the ideal in my point of view. It simplifies the process, allows the consumers to choose what they see it's adequate and proper for their needs and their wallets, and actually may reduce the number of failures that we experienced in the United States 20, 30, 50, 60 years ago.
So would you say that open access, while it's the ideal, isn't necessarily required for LNG import infrastructure? And are there differences to look at if you're not going to have open access?
Well, I see the LNG import infrastructure as not as much as downstream. I see it more of as an upstream, and that can be it's achievable. We saw it in Cove Point, Dominion's Cove Point facility in Maryland, where before it became an exporting facility, it was an importer, where the various importers would reserve a certain part of the tanks to bring it, to store the gas that was coming in from the LNG producing nations. It can be, assuming the right infrastructure and mindset are there. It can become open access Now, the question that arises is what happens if you do not have an open access, if you have, let's say, importing entity A, importing all the LNG and basically controlling the market. This is where a lot of strict and I guess heavy-handed regulation may be needed, because then you are left as a state, as a region, as a country. You are subject to the operational difficulties or manipulations of one entity, where if you have separated the storage, I guess the LNG tank operator from the actual importing of the commodity itself, then there are certain engineering rules that the storage tank operator will have to abide by if they do not want any accidents to happen. But then how the tank is filled or I guess how the market develops, because a tank will have to be filled in a certain way that's based on engineering standards and principles. How the market is developed, who imports how much, when, and why. It's something that the market takes care of itself. And yes, you will see some importers who will succeed, some that will fail. But as with everything economic or anything economics related, the market will find its equilibrium, and the operators will find their optimal operating approach, if you will, in order to successfully participate in the market. So yes, you can have one of the importer and the facility operator, but ideally, again, in my mind, it is best to have it open access. And this is not an ideology that I had since the beginning. Back in the 90s, I was wondering why we would need to have this open access. But having seen how much easier and better and more efficiently the market functions when you have multiple participants, my mind has changed over the past 20, 30 years.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Why don't we go next and look to Commissioner Kimbrell and then Commissioner Balabas. Clarify the difference between open access day zero and trading transmission pipeline capacity. Talk a little bit about that terminology and how it's used today and how it's developed. Ethan?
I'm going to turn to Commissioner Balabas while I get myself in order. I apologize.
All right. Well, I think, to that, Commissioner Berman, I think when you look at the day zero part, that's the foundation, and that's where you have to establish the level and the availability of that capacity. And then by the time you get to the day one and the day two aspects of the regulatory regime, I mean, really the day two is building on that foundation of the very first pieces you established in building that level of pipeline capacity, the availability of it, and then you can then trade it and use it as a commodity. I think Andreas mentioned something earlier in his opening comments that, particularly from the regulator standpoint, when you have a monopoly, whether that's a state-owned enterprise or a privately owned monopoly enterprise, the job of the regulator is to help provide the right incentives, and because we are the regulator, really are the substitute for that completely open competition. And so I think, when you look at as I said, day zero is really the building block and the establishment, and day two is the execution of the basic things that you started at day zero.
Great, thank you. Ethan, do you want to share, or should we go to the next one?
Yeah, let's move on to the next.
Okay,
I apologize.
perfect. No, that's okay. So the next is, if LNG is initially imported only to fuel gas-powered electricity, what is the scope of regulation?
Guessing me? Hi?
Yep, thanks, Andreas.
Okay. Thank you. There is still a role for the regulator, because at the end of the day, to use one of your phrases, electricity is going to be paid for by the retail customer whose electric bill again is subject to regulatory review. The role of the regulator, one of the roles of the regulator is to make sure that the price is the optimal price that can be achieved. That's neither too high, arbitrarily too high, or inexplicably too low. So the regulator will still have to review any agreements between the LNG import and the generating facility in order to make sure that there is no price manipulation, because once the power generation facility has converted to its turbines, if you will, to natural gas, they cannot easily go back to oil. I'm sure there are engineering approaches to achieve that, but then it defeats the purpose of converting to natural gas. So with that, you again have a captive customer, and even if it's a vertically integrated company, that is the importing entity to the storing entity to the generating facility, it's the same operator, or whether there are different operators, price manipulation can take place. So at the end of the pipeline, if you will, right before it goes to the generating facility, which will affect the cost to electricity consumers, that's where the regulator comes in and reviews the terms of the contract. And we have had failures of that nature in the United States. That's why we even have the North American Energy Standards Board that has developed standard contracts for various natural gas and electric transactions. So there is always a role for the regulator, which was part of my initial comments, that to oversee something, because there is always a risk that one, or monopolist, or two oligopolists, with one dominant, one less dominant, who knows, can affect the prices that can bring, at the end of the day, poverty to the consumer. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to go afterwards chasing who was at fault. You want to prevent that from happening so that you can focus your energy and your resource into something more productive.
Great, thank you. Can you also now give the definition or scope of a gas transmission market in the US and elsewhere?
Well, in the United States, the gas transmission market, we call it as interstate pipeline or upstream pipeline, we call it, depending on what the state is and what the protocol is. A quick history is that very, very big picture description is up until 1993, where 636 FERC, or the 636 FERC, standing for Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, based in Washington, D.C., was implemented. The transmission companies both transported and owned the gas that they sold to customers. They, since 1993, the fall of 1993, they were forced to separate the commodity from the transportation or transmission function, creating basically walls, impenetrable walls, that is, someone who was working for company say transmission system could not communicate with company A's commodity sales system, and this way there was the reassurance that there will not be any market manipulation by the two subsidiaries coordinating cooperation to affect the competitive participants. And when I'm talking about competitive, I'm talking about commodity suppliers, because as we all know, building and developing and building and operating a pipeline has such a high average cost that makes it a natural monopoly, hence the need for a regulator. In other parts of the world, as in Europe, the European Commission is following with different terminology, but basically pretty much the same rules that we have in the United States. That the operator of the pipeline, the transmission pipeline, is independent of any commodity. I have been in a few events in Europe, sponsored by NARUC USAID, where the discussion of the rules that we have implemented in the United States has been the dominant point. And we do have, like I said at the beginning, and I will keep repeating it until the end of this session, We have learned from our failures and our successes, and we did have sufficient failures to eventually reach our successes. We have developed rules that ensure fair participation, competition, that at the end benefits the customer, whether it's a power generating facility or someone at home cooking and heating their water for a shower.
So talking about fair competitive behavior, I wonder if either Ethan or Jay want to talk about examples of anti-competitive behavior that might be useful to better understand why unbundling is recommended.
Sure, Commissioner Berman. Well, in Illinois has a long history associated with unbundling of natural gas service, starting with programs in the late 1980s and early 1990s that allowed large customers the ability to purchase and transport their own gas in lieu of receiving these services from local distribution companies. These efforts are accelerated after the passage of FERC Order 636, which required the unbundling of FERC-regulated natural gas pipeline services. The development of these large customer choice programs occurred in conjunction with utility rate cases so that stakeholders had the opportunity to present all of the arguments for consideration by the Commission. So the ICC is not aware of any allegations of anti-competitive behavior associated with that process, though. But regarding residential choice programs, the Illinois General Assembly passed legislation at the end of 2001 that allowed the local distribution companies the option to offer a residential choice program. Shortly after the passage of that law, the state's two largest local distribution companies started pilot programs that ultimately turned into full choice programs. The local distribution companies' requirements for these programs are revisited during each rate case before the Commission. Honestly speaking, the residential choice programs have not seen the success that the larger customer programs experienced. Illinois' main citizen action group, the Citizens Utility Board, has indicated that since it started monitoring the residential choice programs in 2003, around 9 out of 10 of the offers are more expensive than the rate the customer would have staying with the utility. This phenomenon may be due to the manner in which the ICC allows local distribution companies to recover their costs, though. Illinois local distribution companies are not allowed to profit from the sale price of the gas. The gas prices are recovered from the ratepayers on a one-to-one basis. Further, these costs are subject to annual reconciliations that include prudence reviews. Further, due to numerous problems with the behavior of the alternative suppliers associated with residential choice programs for both gas and electric, the Illinois General Assembly passed the Home Energy Affordability and Transparency Act of 2019, the HEAT Act. The HEAT Act provided many consumer protections, including keeping alternative suppliers from automatically renewing a contract from a fixed rate to a variable rate and then increasing the price, ending the ability of the alternative suppliers to charge contract termination fees, requiring supplier marketing materials and utility bills to clearly state the utility's current price, and requiring telemarketing and in-person marketing to be conducted in a language the customer understands. All of these measures hopefully also make it harder for suppliers to overcharge customers who get assistance through the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. In short, the Commission has not observed anti-competitive behavior from the local distribution companies. Instead, any negative behavior has occurred from the alternative suppliers.
Great, thank you so much. Jay, do you have any thoughts in Washington?
Yeah, just very quickly, I mean, very similar to Illinois, we don't see a lot of complaints in front of our commission of any anti-competitive behavior, but I think that's due to the fact that in the regulatory structure, whether that's at the state commission level or at the federal level, the tariffs that the pipeline operators have are very transparent and clear about what the penalties are for any kind of anti-competitive behavior. That includes, for example, if a gas transporter, for instance, wants to nominate and use capacity on the pipeline, perhaps maybe more than they would like to, and that potentially leads to an imbalance. Well, there are tariffs in place at the state and federal level that impose penalties if you do not rectify any imbalance on the system, to ensure that the pipeline is free flowing, the gas is getting to where it needs to go, and that the customers are indeed receiving what they are contractually obligated to get. And so we don't see that, but I think that's a function of the fact that the regulatory regime has those clear tariffs and processes and penalties in place for any anti-competitive behavior.
Thanks. Andreas, do you have anything to add?
Yes, it was triggered by what Commissioner Kimbrell said initially when he mentioned the fact that gas distribution companies do not profit on the commodity itself, other than the cost of the commodity, perhaps some human resource and other operational considerations, which is the case for most U.S. gas distribution companies. Like I said, that's one of the lessons we learned eventually. In Massachusetts, like in our region, the Northeast, like the other two commissioners mentioned, there are not any complaints about the gas distribution company engaging in anti-competitive behavior. Although I also remembered back in the 90s, I was at a conference in St. Louis, Missouri. It was a NARUC DOE back then joint conference. And the president and CEO of one of our smaller local distribution companies was adamant that his customers did not care for competition. Clearly, he was wrong, because the customers who could move operationally to a competitive supplier, they have moved nowadays. He's not the president and CEO anymore. So you will not really see, at least in the United States. I cannot picture any jurisdiction where the utilities themselves will engage in anti-competitive behavior. And basically the carrot or stick or whatever you want to call it, the reward or not or lack thereof, is the fact that they do not have an incentive to make a dollar or any revenue, any profit on the sale of the commodity itself. It's just straight throughput. So the more people want to buy gas, the better it is for the local distribution company, because the meter runs based on the units that they transport for the customers.
Thank you. So looking at that and looking at the utilities, in a scenario where the local distribution company share is reduced to a point where it only provides distribution, i.e. selling pipeline capacity to retailers, and also an absence of excess pipeline capacity, would such an arrangement lead to a risk of congestion, and would some consumers be deprived of supply? And how do you deal with that?
Well, let me start. The idea behind planning, I think Commissioner Balasbas said it earlier, that there are long-term plans that the regulators review, that the local distribution companies, the LDCs, submit to the regulators. That's something that the regulator will catch. So if a company projects that it will, on a peak day, it will add another, its demand will grow to be 200 units, and the regulator sees that the company is not able to deliver 200 units on any given day, then the regulator will not authorize that growth, or will suggest to the local distribution company, well, great, fantastic that you are projecting an increase of X number of units, but you need to accordingly change or improve your local distribution system. So the role of the regulator is not just to look at the price that is paid or not. The role of the regulator is to also make sure that safety, availability, to put it in 3 words, that the commodity has to be least cost, reliable, and diverse. This way, if you cannot deliver the commodity as a local distribution company, you're not delivering a reliable service or least cost service for that matter. So An LDC has to plan, and with its plan comes the regulatory review, and with the regulatory review, we see where it is deficient. So if nobody pays attention to what is going on, absolutely, you are going to have a situation where there will be more demand than supply. But that's why all four of us, and then hundreds and thousands of our colleagues around the country, are here for, to make sure that this situation does not arise.
Right. And the integrity and go on, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting things. And we have seen the situation in Atlanta, Georgia, where Atlanta Gas and Light basically got out of the business of selling natural gas commodity, I would say in the mid to late 90s, completely unbundled, got out of the business. It is only a transporter of natural gas. It only owns the pipes. It does not own, and the meters. It does not own anything that goes through its pipes. And when one supplier, whoever, does not deliver enough gas for the expected or projected demand, there is an appointed, if you will, supplier of last resort that changes every couple of years based on a bidding process, who is then responsible for making up the deficiency. Now, Atlanta Gas and Light does not have the same kinds of demands that Washington, Illinois, New York, or Massachusetts will have in the winter, where you can all of a sudden have a steep demand increase and everybody will be without gas and you'll have system failures, pressure failures, and everything else. But it is doable, especially for areas where the climate is more moderate than the extremes will. And although I don't think that Washington has such extreme changes in climate like Illinois, New York, and Massachusetts experience, but you know, if up in our region, it will be more, it could be more problematic than in much more moderate climates. Thank you.
Right. So with that, the integrity and reliability of the gas system is paramount. And while there are obligations on the utilities to do gas system planning, it is for the regulator to also work with them and monitor and oversee what is being done to ensure that there is enough supply and to ensure that the safety of the system is paramount. Looking at that, and you spoke a little bit about it, both Jay and Ethan, earlier in terms of what you do from a compliance perspective, but if you can get a little bit under the hood about the compliance monitoring and what sort of approaches your regulatory commissions do when they're looking at it from a safety aspect.
Well, I'll start with that, Commissioner Berman. I think you know, what we do is when, from the safety aspect, you know, of the thing to remember in the U.S. is that pipeline safety is it's a federal and a state partnership between the federal government and the various state governments, and a lot of the state commissions are involved in pipeline safety. You know, specifically in Washington, you know, what we have an actual group of staff here on our commission that are pipeline inspectors and specialists that look at the safety and the integrity of the local distribution companies' pipeline systems, and we review all of their plans that they submit to not only us but the federal government as well on an annual basis. And then we also have a mechanism in place where we require our gas companies with pipeline infrastructure to submit 20-year high-risk pipe replacement plans, and we review those plans every 2 years, ask those companies to update them for a 20-year look and to identify the highest risk pipe at risk for failure. And then we evaluate those, we approve those plans, and then as part of that, we provide an option for our gas companies to help pay for some of that infrastructure by providing them an annual cost recovery mechanism for pipe that is replaced that is pursuant to that plan.
Great, thank you. Ethan?
Yeah, sure, Commissioner Berman. I'll just add that given a little legislative history, in 1968, the Gas Pipeline Safety Act gave jurisdiction over all gas safety in the U.S. to the Secretary of Transportation. This is pretty much what Commissioner Velasquez was referring to. However, this act also allowed any state with a law comparable to the federal law in scope and intent the ability to enter into an agreement with the Secretary of Transportation to carry out safety enforcement in that state. So in 1969, the Illinois legislature passed the Illinois Gas Pipeline Safety Act that gave the Illinois Commerce Commission jurisdiction over all interstate gas safety in Illinois. Shortly afterward, the U.S. Department of Transportation certificated the ICC, or the Illinois Commerce Commission's Gas Pipeline Safety Program, to oversee all interstate gas safety within Illinois. So that said, the enforcement of pipeline safety rules for interstate gas operators that are located within Illinois is still the responsibility of the U.S. Department of Transportation. It's the U.S. Department of Transportation's Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, that oversees the ICC's program. Chapter 601 of the Gas Pipeline Safety Act authorizes federal grants and aid of up to 80% of a state's agency's personnel, equipment, and activities costs for its pipeline safety program. Commissioner Balabas referred to this as well. This allows the ICC to employ 11 analysts, a supervisor, and assistant director whose responsibility is the enforcement of the pipeline safety regulations. These regulations are written to ensure safety in the design, construction, testing, operation, and maintenance of pipeline facilities. PHMSA also provides the training necessary for the pipeline safety analysts to conduct their reviews.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
If
Andreas,
I may add something,
sure.
I'm sorry, if I may add something, perhaps I had just forgotten, it just dawned on me, and perhaps the three of you have forgotten, is the natural gas distribution infrastructure replacement and modernization report that was issued by NARUC this past January.
You stole my words, Andreas.
Well, that's the safest theft I've ever made in my life. Not that I've made that that Kira and I co-authored, and you know, in the acknowledgements, when you see Honorable Jay Balazbas, Honorable Diane Berman, and Honorable Ethel Kimbrough, where we describe the efforts of the states. I'm sorry, it just dawned on me, and if you want to continue with that, go ahead.
I think it's really important because these are building blocks, and it goes back to the roadmap, day 0, day 1, day 2, and really all of these things interlink. And so, you know, some of the expertise that's here has also been involved in a lot of the NARUC educational partnerships, but also educational handbooks that weren't necessarily for the international community, but actually very much dovetail with what we're doing. And there are a lot of publications. You can go to the NARUC website, but there are a lot of publications that are talking about gas expansion, infrastructure issues, pipeline safety, advanced technologies, and all of us panelists have been in some way involved in many of those, but it continues, and I think it's continuously improving your regulation and moving forward in the markets that you do, and keep remembering the roadmap is there. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and having to look at what you need to do for your building blocks, and essentially all of the interconnection with the regulators as well as the industry are really, really important, and that oversight in helping, because we all want to see it successfully thrive. I am now going to move to a final question, and then we're going to wrap up with some final thoughts. I think it's important for us, while we are looking at gas, it is important that we are looking at the gas network and how it could facilitate energy integration, renewable energy integration to the energy system. I think we're all looking at in some fashion how to have a gas transition that interconnects with that. If Commissioner Kimbrough and Commissioner Balabas wants to talk on this topic, that would be wonderful.
Sure,
Either one of you. Great.
Sure, Diane. Excuse me, Commissioner Berman. Talking about the state of Illinois, Illinois is home to the country's third largest city, Chicago, and has a unique geography, being in the middle of the country, with pipelines also coming from Canada. This makes Illinois home to 13 interstate natural gas pipelines, many of which main purpose is to serve the Chicago market. Chicago's size and Illinois' location also mean that there are many large electric transmission and distribution lines throughout Illinois to serve the energy load for the population. The many pipelines and electric transmission and distribution lines provide many opportunities to site natural gas generation near locations requiring support on the electric grid. This is important because solar and wind, due to their very nature, do not operate on demand. So fast responding generation is necessary to potentially supplement those occasions when renewable energy is either not available or not available in the amounts needed to operate the system. And in Illinois, the largest challenge to the integration of natural gas and renewable generation involves construction an energy network capable of providing heating fuel during the winter months, while also providing sufficient capacity to allow stakeholders to resupply the in-state and other nearby storage fields. Here again, because Illinois' location results in it being a crossroads to many pipelines, there's a surplus in capacity that will support additional natural gas generation to facilitate renewable energy integration into the energy system.
Great, thank you. Commissioner?
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. I think I will add to that and say here in Washington State, we have a very ambitious 100% clean energy goal by 2045. And one of the questions that's come up as part of that transition as we begin thinking about and planning for it is, here in the Northwest, we have relatively newer pipeline infrastructure than other parts of the country. And we've invested a lot in that system and trying to figure out how we can leverage the value of that system, not only for integrating renewable energy with natural gas generation, but also looking at the pipeline system in terms of potential new sources of gas, whether that be regular natural gas or renewable natural gas or other sources that can serve customers. And keeping also in mind that our natural gas system here in the Pacific Northwest in our winter months still supplies a lot of energy to help heat homes during some of the coldest parts of our year. And just for example, in 2017, in January, on one of the coldest days we've had in the Pacific Northwest in recent years, the natural gas system delivered 6.5 times more energy than our hydropower electric generation system. And so as I said, we have a very valuable system that customers have invested a lot in. And so as we look to the integration of renewables and the transition to cleaner fuels, one of the things we will continue to look at here is how do we best leverage our system to help facilitate that.
Thank you. So the objective of the Asia Gas Partnership, as I said before, is to share best practices in the development of secure, reliable, and economic regulatory frameworks governing natural gas sector development. This is to facilitate investment and regulatory advances in the energy industry and ultimately stimulate gas demand growth by optimizing these gas network infrastructures development projects and developing domestic gas markets in Asia. I really am glad that we were able to get under the hood a little bit in the creation of the roadmap for the development of downstream natural gas markets. I personally believe we can make a real difference in the energy world of the future, but we have to invest in it. And continued innovative development of existing and current infrastructure is important. Working together, we can positively shape this collective future, and that's part of what we're hoping to do here today. Before we go, does anyone have any final comments they'd like to say? Key takeaways for folks to keep in mind. Again, remember the roadmap is a continuing evolution and one that we'll have to go back under the hood on numerous different issues together.
Well,
Go ahead.
I would just say that again, like you stated, the roadmap is just a pathway forward to the establishment of these liberalized, competitive, efficient downstream natural gas markets, and that the steps within each day may be skipped, as we already stated, but if those steps are skipped, hopefully they're revisited later to ensure further and comprehensive progress is made.
Great. Jay?
I'll just echo that, and I would also say that I think the roadmap is a great tool to help you get thinking. You need, as Andreas mentioned earlier, you need to adapt this to your own situation, both the political and the policy and regulatory and environmental situations in each of the unique countries. So the roadmap is a good list of the best practices, and encourage everyone to look at that as a suggestion and thinking of how you shape it to fit your needs.
Great. And Andreas, do you want to end for us?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. The idea behind the roadmap is to introduce a more efficient market, and for countries that are trying to reduce their CO2 emissions, the carbon dioxide emissions, natural gas is the solution. Natural gas has been in advanced economies, I guess, energy economies like California, the fuel of choice when, as Commissioner Kimbrell said, there's no gas or there's no sun or wind to allow us to turn our light switches on. So natural gas is cleaner than oil and coal and less expensive than renewables. So as you proceed with the decisions on whether it is natural gas or how much natural gas should be in your mix, you also need to consider the economic impact of the decision. And currently, and for the foreseeable future, considering how many natural gas discoveries are being made on a daily basis, basically nowadays, natural gas may be the best solution until, if and when renewables become more approachable by the less affluent economies. And I do not even think that California is affluent enough to afford 100% renewables, but at the same time, there are environmental concerns that we're not going to touch upon here associated with renewables. But as I said in the beginning, it's a complex process. We are here to help, both USAID and NARUC and the four of us. We have enough expertise to help with any questions that you want to send to Ariel or Dave, and we will be more than happy to help. And I cannot say that the gas is the fuel of the future forever, amen. But natural gas is going to be a long-term investment that is going to provide benefits beyond what I or my colleagues here on this panel can express. With a closing thought, I was talking to, in the United States, we have regional coordinators of power generation. I was talking to one representative from one of those, they're called ISOs, one of those coordinators, if you will, who told me that natural gas in the United States is going to be here for several decades. So if it's going to be here for several decades, it is going to be for a century plus, I believe, in economies that are just trying to get rid of coal and oil. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you so much. And with that, I'd like to again thank the U.S. Agency for International Development and the Regional Development Mission in Asia. We are continuing to work with everyone, and thank NARUC as well for putting this webinar together. And we look forward to the continued engagement. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.